In August 2024, when the first Western-supplied F-16 fighter jet finally touched Ukrainian soil, the world reacted with excitement, hope, and bold predictions. Many believed this jet would instantly change the course of the war, tipping the balance against Russia. Headlines called it a game changer, analysts praised NATO's support, and expectations skyrocketed. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Ukraine itself. The F-16 did not arrive as a miracle weapon, and it did not dominate the skies the way Western air forces usually do. Instead, it was thrown into one of the most dangerous and unforgiving battlefields modern aviation has ever seen. This was not a war where air superiority existed. This was not a battlefield built for NATO doctrine, and this was not a fight where textbook tactics worked. Ukrainian pilots quickly realized a hard truth: the way the West trained them to use the F-16 simply did not match the brutal reality waiting back home. Russian air defenses were everywhere, enemy fighters lurked at high altitude, and even reaching a target became a life-or-death challenge. But instead of failing, Ukraine adapted. Quietly, creatively, and brilliantly, Ukrainian pilots began rewriting the rules of air combat. They stopped flying the NATO way and started fighting the Ukrainian way. What followed was not just survival, but success. And as we move deeper into 2026, these unexpected F-16 tactics may shape the future of the entire war. Core problem Ukraine faced with its F-16s was not the aircraft itself, but the assumptions behind how it was meant to be used. NATO training is built around one key idea: air superiority. Western pilots are trained to fly in environments where friendly forces already control the skies, where enemy aircraft are limited, and where air defenses are either suppressed or destroyed early. Ukraine had none of that. From the very first missions, Ukrainian pilots encountered constant threats from Russian fighters and surface-to-air missile systems, even over their own territory. One Ukrainian Air Force pilot openly admitted that after returning home, reality hit hard. The tactics taught by NATO instructors simply did not fit the war Ukraine was fighting. This conflict was fundamentally different. Russian aircraft like the MiG-31, Su-35, and even the Su-57 could wait safely at high altitude inside occupied territory, while layered air defenses created deadly zones that Ukrainian jets could not easily penetrate. Without air superiority, every flight became a gamble. Even basic strike missions were blocked by enemy air threats before Ukrainian pilots could reach their targets. Unlike Western air forces, Ukraine could not rely on overwhelming numbers, constant radar coverage, or suppression campaigns. Its air force was too small and its enemy too well prepared. As a result, NATO's textbook approach turned into a liability rather than an advantage. Ukraine had a choice: continue flying by the book and suffer heavy losses, or abandon doctrine and invent something entirely new. Ukrainian pilots chose adaptation over tradition, and that decision changed everything. Once Ukrainian pilots accepted that NATO-style air combat would not work, they began experimenting with tactics designed purely for survival and impact. One of the most important changes was abandoning high-altitude operations. Flying high made F-16s easy targets for Russian radars and long-range missiles, so Ukrainian pilots started flying dangerously low, sometimes just above the terrain. At these altitudes, ground clutter, background noise, and natural obstacles interfered with enemy radar systems, making detection and missile lock far more difficult. This approach came with extreme risk, where even a small mistake could end in disaster, but it allowed Ukrainian jets to slip through heavily defended airspace. At the same time, pilots adopted aggressive maneuver tactics when confronted by Russian fighters, forcing enemy missiles to lose lock or waste valuable shots. Another major shift was teamwork. Instead of operating independently, F-16s began flying in tightly coordinated groups. In some missions, one aircraft deliberately exposed itself to enemy defenses, acting as bait and drawing missile fire, while another aircraft moved in to strike the target. These decoy tactics not only protected strike aircraft, but also drained Russian missile stockpiles. One Ukrainian pilot described a mission where 3 aircraft worked together to force Russian defenses to launch missiles from multiple directions, creating a brief opening that allowed the strike plane to destroy its target and return safely. These tactics were not found in any NATO manual. They were born from necessity, tested under fire, and refined through experience. Ukraine was no longer trying to dominate the skies. It was learning how to survive inside them. Ukraine's adaptation did not stop in the air, it extended to how and where its F-16s operated on the ground. Unlike traditional NATO air forces that rely on permanent bases and predictable infrastructure, Ukraine adopted constant movement as a survival strategy. F-16s were rarely kept in one location for long, frequently redeploying between airfields and even using unconventional runways such as highways. This mobility made it extremely difficult for Russia to target Ukrainian jets before they could take off. Unpredictability became a weapon. At the same time, Ukraine accepted a level of risk that most air forces would consider unacceptable. Flying low, acting as decoys, and deliberately drawing enemy fire exposed pilots to constant danger. That danger was real. During the early months of F-16 operations, Ukraine lost several aircraft, each loss serving as a harsh but valuable lesson. Instead of retreating, Ukrainian pilots studied every failure, refining their tactics to reduce future losses. The results were visible. After an initial period of attrition, losses dropped sharply as experience replaced theory. These pilots were not just flying missions, they were learning in real time, under fire, against one of the world's largest air forces. Every sortie tested both nerve and innovation. Yet despite limited numbers and overwhelming threats, Ukraine continued to operate its F-16s effectively. What made this possible was not superior technology, but flexibility, discipline, and the willingness to break doctrine. By accepting risk where it mattered most and avoiding predictability at all costs, Ukraine kept its air power alive. Survival itself became a form of victory. By late 2025, the results of Ukraine's unconventional F-16 strategy were impossible to ignore. Despite operating without air superiority and facing one of the strongest air forces in the world, Ukrainian F-16s had intercepted more than 1,000 Russian missiles and drones, protecting cities' infrastructure and lives. At the same time, these jets successfully struck hundreds of ground targets in occupied territory, including command centers, ammunition depots, and logistical hubs. None of this would have been possible if Ukraine had stubbornly followed NATO doctrine. Adaptation turned limitation into advantage. Looking ahead to 2026, the impact of these tactics may grow even stronger. Ukraine is expected to receive additional F-16s from Western partners, expanding its operational reach and flexibility. More aircraft mean more decoys, more rotations, and more opportunities to exploit weaknesses in Russian air defenses. At the same time, Russia remains cautious, keeping many of its aircraft at a distance and relying heavily on missiles rather than direct air engagement. This hesitation is a silent acknowledgement that Ukraine's approach works. The war has proven something deeper than the effectiveness of a single aircraft. It has shown that modern warfare is no longer won by numbers alone or by following established doctrine. Innovation, adaptability, and the willingness to rewrite the rules now shape the battlefield. Ukraine may not control the skies, but it has learned how to fight within them, and as 2026 unfolds, that lesson could define the next phase of the war.